Day 1300 of the war. Trump has once again voiced his desire for Europe to impose harder sanctions against Russia. He emphasized that until this is done, the U.S. will not increase pressure on the Kremlin. At the same time, U.S. spokesman Mike Johnson, speaking in the lower chamber, said that new sanctions against Russia have long been missed in the Congress and are ready to be inflicted with, but without Trump's help, this is not planned. Ukrainian media confirmed that a conveyor belt behind recent railway diversions in Russia was standing still. According to them, strikes have occurred on important transport areas, reducing Russia's capability to conduct combat operations. In the Ukrainian armed forces, some of Sumy's have been repelled, continuing to drive Russian troops back to the border. DeepState and Volodymyr Zelensky stated the Ukrainian military's success in this sector and emphasized that they have liberated another settlement. Meanwhile, Russian troops are being accumulated in Donetsk region, making it a decisive strike. So far, Russian assaults haven't had any results, and the situation of Russian units 51st Army, which broke through in the Dobrapilya direction earlier, becoming worse and worse. Ukrainian forces are trying to set up encirclements around them, trying to destroy these units. In Crimea, the gasoline situation is worsening. If it is sometimes supplied to large cities, then in rural areas it simply disappeared, which, according to locals, is also putting a steam campaign under threat. All this and more in today's fresh update, which you can support with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. Your subscriptions are especially important. They are targeted at YouTube's algorithms when they decide to release a video further. So, be sure to subscribe. You can also support the channel financially on Patreon. The link is in the description, and by buying NVPN, a tool to bypass blocks, watch YouTube at normal speed and normal quality, use Twitter, Instagram, call WhatsApp, Telegram, go to Discord, go to blocked media. In short, use the internet normally, not as Vladimir Putin commands. So if you have access to normal internet, buy NVPN via the link in the description. And let me remind you, for now, it's not forbidden in Russia to buy VPNs and use them. Let's move on to what happened in less than a day. Donald Trump repeated his message, Europe and NATO, which he had previously posted on his social network. The point is, while Europe does not impose harder sanctions against Russia, the US does not do the same. Well, they don't doing their work, Trump said. NATO must unify, Europe must unify and act. Listen, Europe is our friends, but they continue to buy oil from Russia. You can't be the only ones acting in full force. If Europe buys oil from Russia, I don't want that, and the sanctions they impose are not strong enough. I'm willing to impose sanctions, but they must toughen their measures and make them the same size as I do, said the US president. Speaker of the Congress chamber of the US, Mike Johnson, said it would be better to impose tougher sanctions, but he emphasized they would only be after Trump's insult. I do believe, he said, that desperate times require desperate measures. I believe adequate sanctions against Russia have long been in sight. I mean, there's a big demand for it at the Congress, so we're ready to work with the White House and our colleagues in the Senate to achieve this. I personally aim at achieving this, said U.S. Speaker of the Chamber Mike Johnson in an interview with CBS News. Without waiting for green light from Trump, Johnson responded, the Congress truly can't do it their own way. It should be a partnership, but we rely on the chief commander. Everyone in America wants this bloodshed to stop, and President Trump hopes for this. And of course, said Michael Johnson, again, my attitude to this is double. On one hand, clearly saying you have to pressure Russia and impose sanctions is undoubtedly a step forward for Trump. On the other, shifting responsibility on Europe, especially on the whole NATO community, including Turkey, which no tough sanctions will ever work on, seems more of an attempt to justify one's own inaction. What do you think will be key here? The same answer as before, how the American society will react to such an excuse. If such a position works for Americans and Trump's rating starts to increase from suspicion that he does something inadequate, then yes, obviously, Trump's plan will work. In many cases, American journalists will ask themselves if they'll continue to dub Trump with war in Ukraine on each press release or switch to a different topic. Europe has also not yet seen Europe's response to Trump's new conditions. If Western leaders reach an agreement to fulfill Trump's conditions but previously agree to the obligatory, then this could have a serious effect. In short, Trump has set an impossible plan, but if it fulfills, the effect of such a pressure on Russia will be colossal. Another question is that within these negotiations, Europe-US, due to a conditional deal on sanctions, should include, for example, Turkey, which will not meet the conditions described by Trump at all. And judging by his fresh statement, after all, when he speaks about these sanctions, he means Europe, not NATO in general, because, as you can see in the above-mentioned statement, he mostly talks about Europe. A separate question, a response to which can show whether Trump is serious or just looking for an excuse, is whether he will pressure Hungary and Slovakia. They are the main buyers of Russian energy resources from Europe. Well, I mean those from Europe who buy Russian energy resources. This whole campaign can help Ukraine by striking the Russian oil sphere. That is, why would Hungary buy oil from Russia if it doesn't have a physical possibility to deliver it? At the same time, the damage from Trump is, of course, hard to evaluate. Since Trump became president, Russia has been striking Ukraine harder, writes Wall Street Journal. According to the article, Russia has been striking civil infrastructure more often, ignoring U.S. president's calls for peace. Also, journalists noted that Russia has often increased strikes immediately after talks or phone calls between representatives of Washington, Kiev, and Moscow. It's worth noting that Russia now has more opportunities for strikes, given the increasing production of shots. However, this doesn't cancel very specific timing of strikes, where the more active they are, the more Trump shows political impotence and fear of pressure on Russia. At the same time, without action, or rather without Trump's actions, are being hit, in principle, by U.S. authority in the world. More and more authoritarian leaders perceive him as a scoundrel who can be perceived neither seriously nor as a threat and a restraining factor. The Washington Post reports that many have begun laughing at Trump, counting his tail as if the threats had never come through. The publication writes that the station's social attacks on Ukraine, as well as a series of planned operations on Western goals in Ukraine and Poland, have shown that the Russian Federation is confident in Trump's indecency and the European leaders. The material says that against this background, the Russian Federation will likely continue to perceive NATO's defense, and I, unfortunately, agree with them, as I released a video recently. However, to be objective, I will add that there is at least one thing that has become better for Ukraine under Trump. The U.S. is not trying to limit the strikes on Ukrainian-owned infrastructure, even on friendly terms and on the so-called thank you, because kinetic sanctions, as it is known, are the best. According to the Ukrainian media, a reference to the VGUR source, as a result of the UAV attack on September 13, equipment for the production of carbamide was damaged. It is claimed that the metaphrase chemicals are a critically important chemical industry for Russia's defense industry, and secondly, the producers of chemical products and organic synthesis. GURI also took responsibility for the strike on the refinery Nova Oil Tower in Ufa, which we do not doubt much. Accordingly, the strike on one of the largest Russian refineries in the Leningrad region was on the account of the unmanned systems. According to a source from the Ukraine Ministry of Defense, Ukraine's intelligence and special operations forces are standing behind the explosions that took place on September 13 on the railway in Orlovsk and the Leningrad regions. These railway branches are a critically important logistical link to the supply of occupation troops in the Kharkiv and Sumy directions. As a result of the destruction of the railway infrastructure in these sectors, the Russians will feel a significant complication in logistics, which in turn will significantly affect their capability to conduct active actions against the Ukrainian Defense Forces, the source emphasized. 2 employees of the Russian Guard were killed in one of the bombs, another received a severe injury and later died in the hospital. On the morning of September 14, 17 trains were delayed due to the incident. Governor of Len region Alexander Drozdenko said that on the night of September 14, in the Luzhny district at the intersection of Stroganovo and Emshinskaya, a power outage occurred, 15 empty cisterns were fixed. The Ukrainian side claims that the cisterns were caught in the fire. There were no casualties. Investigators consider sabotage. In another area of Len region, a single vehicle also left the road. In that incident, a machine gunner died. Overall, stay away from Russian infrastructure and Russian fuel infrastructure, because the war is coming. I remind you, Riskardia, by the way, is a full participant in this war and even tried to go on the road to Kiev. Well, they didn't get there a little, they were broken down on the road, so stay away from law enforcement, from everything that is connected with potential objects for attack, that is, all infrastructure, all logistics, this is all under attack. The Russian side will not make an effort to protect the peaceful population and the unequal, in fact, too. Putin's residency is being guarded, so stay far away from this if you want to live. The war is coming, Ukraine will be striking, and it will be increasingly and more often. And I hope that in the near future we will see flamingos flying over Russian factories of the defense industry. Because basically drones can effectively strike refineries, because refineries are, you know, in computer games vulnerable points. And even a small combat unit can cause serious consequences for oil refineries' factories up to a stop, and a long time if a certain unit is struck by a refinery, especially the primary refinery. When we talk about the VPK refinery, there is no such critical detail, so it makes sense to hit with missiles on them. Jamalers, Storm Shadow, Atakmes, Flamingo, Uram, and much more. In short, let's hope that we will see these arrival soon. I hope that this whole story with Flamingo will really flow into, if not for the missile parity, then at least into the increase in the cost of this war for the Russian side and into the serious destruction of the Russian military-industrial complex. But missiles are strikes, and the main part of the war takes place on the ground, where Ukrainian fighters fight Russian occupiers every day. This is especially done by drone operators who have become a real, well, I don't know, a real revolution has occurred in military operations with the appearance of drones that work directly on the front line and create kill zones. Therefore, it is very important to support such units. A whole sector can literally depend on them, well, in the global sense, the whole war. That is why we are helping you raise funds for the units of strike UAVs of the 28th Mechanized Brigade of the 2nd Battalion. They work in the Donetsk direction and the most difficult direction that now exists. Here is a message from the military. I wish health to the 2nd Mechanized Battalion of the strike UAVs of the 28th Brigade. We ask support and help from the Telegram subscription sitter and YouTube channel Michael Nacke. Our unit works in Donbass and effectively destroys the enemy, but with your help it will destroy even more and better. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine! In the description, as well as the monobank QR code, there's also private, PayPal, cryptocurrency USDT, TRC20, and Bitcoin. Let's help Ukrainian soldiers destroy Russia's occupying fascist forces. They risk their lives and give their lives for their country, for their freedom, for their families, and direct aid is the best thing anyone can do right now. All the links are in the description. Let's move on. Volodymyr Zelensky notes the effectiveness of kinetic sanctions. The most effective sanctions are the fire in Russian oil factories, terminals, and oil bases, he said. It's hard to disagree, but kinetic sanctions show their effectiveness here and now. Clearly, the Ukrainian leadership is no longer waiting for some serious actions from the US to pressure the Kremlin. In fact, none of it matters to the US, so what? Well, since Trump has come to power, he won't do anything significant. You can, of course, try to sway him, actively sway him to the fact that he really pushed Russia, supported Ukraine, and so on. And in principle, the situation is a bit better than one could expect. But the basic battle is with direct Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian drones, and hopefully in the near future, Ukrainian missiles. In the annexed Crimea, by the end of the last week, the situation with gasoline for refineries sharply worsened. The shortage of the popular brand A95, now a shortage has been added to the gasoline brand A92. One Crimean activist stated this on anonymous conditions, applying for photos. According to the activist, in many Crimea regions, there is currently no gasoline for refineries, not on A95, not on A92. Because of the rapid increase in gasoline prices, many Crimean motorists, to the detriment of their vehicles, gone to the refinery for cheaper gasoline, A92, but now it has also disappeared into the refineries. The activist said such a fuel shortage in Crimea has been remembered and even protected. According to him, the sharpest situation is the lack of fuel in rural areas of Crimea. If gasoline appears in Simferopol, it disappears into the refinery, while in the Crimea region the situation is critical. Many refineries have even closed, no work is done. The gasoline currently comes from fuel and gas. Against the backdrop of a starting craft company, this is threatening with collapse. Authorities have introduced a system of cards, allowing only transport to budget companies. The situation has clearly come out of the control of Russia's occupying head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, which even makes his arm a seat, the activist noted. According to the pace of the 100% gasoline cost in oil refineries, this product became the most quickly expensive in Crimea. At the end of August, gasoline cost the popular brand of gasoline, the 95th. In short, in Crimea, it was 70.79 rubles per liter. Now fuel in this brand is being manufactured at the price of 72.27 rubles. But experts note that gasoline costs will rapidly rise, and I don't see any pretext for change. We discussed Vladimir Milovsrok earlier, take a look if you missed. Any measures could be made obligatory at such prices and so on, but that doesn't change the fuel shortage situation at all. It won't stop until Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries stop. That's it. There's no exit for it. Yes, and while Russian refineries are on fire, they continue to do so quite actively. Last week there were about 4 strikes on refineries, and let's hope there will be more of them. There are no opportunities to contain this fuel crisis, in fact, especially now in the fall when it's going to be desertion and so on. In short, I don't know what they're going to do with it. For now, I don't see any opportunities for them to fight it somehow. We'll see. Will Ukraine be able to continue striking fuel infrastructure for several months? Because if it does, it will create a rather serious fuel crisis, which will, in turn, accelerate inflation and much more. And this, together with the crises in other sectors that are also growing, can lead to a full-scale economic collapse. Well, Vadim, we will not guess. We have promised this collapse to you many times, different specialists, economists, and so on. It has not happened. It has not happened. But perhaps closer than now to this, it was not especially, to what the opinion of the economists themselves indicates inside Russia, official speakers Ilvir Nabiulina, and so on. In short, look at yesterday's report with Vladimir Milov, the economic one. There is detail about this with all the quotes, with all the videos of the official Russian representatives, and so on. The special forces of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense discovered and hit a self-propelled fire department from the ZRK Buk M3 composition on the temporarily occupied territory of the Zaporizhia region, writes the publication Militarny. The video was published by the press service GUR. It is reported that the strike on the air defense system was carried out near the settlement of Oleksandrovka on the temporarily occupied territory of the Zaporizhia region, more than 50 kilometers from the front line, that is, another middle strike. Unfortunately, without personnel objective control, it is impossible to determine whether the system was completely destroyed or only damaged. However, even if it was damaged, the drone hit the most valuable part of the air defense system, so the vehicle will likely require major repair. Usually, drones of the type used it to strike deep rear areas, particularly in temporarily occupied Crimea, where they had already destroyed many air defense assets, radars, several planes and helicopters, as well as struck several submarines and ships. The beloved 225th OSB continues to push the enemy back in Sumy region. Russians have redeployed it near Kostiantynivka, reports DeepState. Thanks to a successful planning of the offensive organizations in the 225th OSB fighters, they have pushed the enemy back from fortified positions in Sumy. Analysts write, despite the fact that the units are not working fully and also helping to hold the enemy in other areas, the assault troops are managing to advance further. We hope that the 225th OSB will be scaled up into the brigade in the future and will bring new achievements for the Ukrainian state. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also reported on the successes of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in their advance in the Sumy region. He spoke about this in his evening address on September 14, 2025, and thanked the soldiers of several units. The head of the state emphasized that the cheerfulness of the defense forces continues to advance in the direction of the state border of the Sumy region. Zelensky also expressed thanks to military 225th Separate Assault Regiment and the 71st Yedder Brigade, which is conducting active combat operations in this region. Tactical success of Ukraine's defense forces in Sumy is very good. It's always good when our units, with or without minimal losses, occupy a new line, advance, and improve our tactical situation. But the enemy has another priority, targeting Donbas on an operational scale. That's where all the accents should be right now. Donbas doesn't look too convincing with the capture of a village compared to the fact that we may lose not a single city, the officer reports. I don't exactly agree with him, but success is success. It's objective, but in the part where he says it. How does it? This is a classic jumble. Don't put on helmets, focus on areas with serious, large problems where the main battle is. I agree, but in my view, it doesn't agree with the efforts of Ukrainian fighters who are returning to the Sumy region. Now let's move to the Donetsk region because the main battle is taking place there, and the outcome of the war literally depends on what happens in the coming weeks and months. So let's take a closer look at what Konstantin Mashevitz actually did. He tells us details about Dobropolye and Konstantinovka, about what was happening there, and about what Russia is planning. For me, he writes, there is no doubt that the Russian command has a certain plan for conducting the so-called Great Elite Offensive, or, if you want, an operational strategic offensive across the entire eastern operational zone, an important element, along with the personnel which undoubtedly has. The plan for the so-called Pokrovsko-Myrnograd offensive, Mashevitz notes. According to his actions, he adds, and the events that took place in the Pokrovsk and then Toretsk directions along the course of the summer as well as southward in the operational zone of the enemy troops group, That is, Russia and the East. This plan was and is, and quite consistent and structured by its details and elements. And of course, he writes, I will not take to claim that I understand all its parts and their meaning. I am not a telepathy. It is clear that I do not have access to information from the headquarters of the Russian command on this account. But after a certain time, starting from the spring of the current year, any person became acquainted with the basics and minimal knowledge from the theory of operational art, a certain opinion on this about could quite form. But in fact, I am not an exception in this sense, so I think they need to share with their audience much of its notes. We, like his audience, are undoubtedly engaged in analyzing it. Apparently, the Russian command, when planning its summer strategic offensive in the Eastern Operational Zone, obviously provided organization for a number of offensive operational tactical operations, which were supposed to be, according to its plan, to provide itself with a certain complex of events with a unified strategic goal and aim, so to speak, within the framework of a unified operational tactical plan. The capture of the Pokrovsko-Myrnograd agglomeration, which is in the responsibility zone of the military group center, in this sense clearly presented itself as one of its most important elements. I argue what exactly the purpose of this entire strategic offensive was. The Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, Kupiansk, or a breakthrough, at least of operational importance on the adjacent flanks of the southern and eastern operational zones of the northern part of the Zaporizhia region. For today's our review, this is not the point, Mashavitz notes. As for me, he writes, I still believed and continue to believe that the main goal of the former remains the last large city agglomeration of Donbass, which is under the control of Ukraine. That is, the enemy clearly planned during his large summer offensive, in first place to capture Pokrovsk. Why do I think so? Because the entire course of the subsequent events indicates this. Obviously, in order for this goal, Russian command would simultaneously have to achieve several operational and tactical tasks, which it has ultimately started to fulfill. Starting with the end of spring of this year, which is to break through to the outskirts of Drobyshev-Oyampol, which provides a capture of Liman, to reach the wide front directly to the north of Donetsk, from Pryshiv to Zakitny. The main-scale advances by the ZSU were aimed at capturing the southern flank area, Druzhkivka-Kostiantynivka. The broader, operational strategic goal to create real prerequisites for capturing the entire Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration was to deepen and expand these enveloping actions. Break through to Oskal in the 20th Combined Arms Army of the West Group, and reach Dobropolye along the adjacent flanks of the Center and Yuk Group, which of course provided a way out for Pokrovsk. Well, in fact, the Russian command began to achieve all this by carrying out a whole number of operational tactical offensive operations in the corresponding directions, from the offensive of its 20th and 25th armies in the Lyman direction, and to Oskal before the persistent fighting behind Toretsk. In Chasiv Yar by the forces of 51st and 3rd Armies and the 3rd Army Corps, as well as by encirclement by Pokrovsk forces by general military armies of the Center Group until their breakthrough in the Dobropolye direction. The enemy's logical plan, that is, Russia's, is to block the Pokrovsk-Myrnograd agglomeration and its further capture by the Russians over a simultaneous assault from the north and south. The obvious breakthrough in the Dobropolye direction was expected in the future. Apparently, this achievement was planned in stages. First, to capture Toretsk and break through the south to the nearer approach to Kostiantynivka, and obviously Kostiantynivka itself planned to capture quite quickly, with the help of Russian troops advancing harsher than Chasiv Yar. Then, a breakthrough was likely planned toward the areas of north of Pokrovsk and Myrnograd. Then there would clearly have been a concentric simultaneous assault of these settlements from 3 directions at once. If only briefly, in reality, all this happened and continues to happen with very significant changes and corrections, which were put into all these built-in plans of the Russian command of the Ukrainian armed forces, and which put a big sign of the achievement of the Russian command, putting their goals before them in the Dobropolye and Konstantinovsk directions, as well as the entire plan of the large offensive of the 25th year. Who forgets, I remind you, writes Mashavitz, the main canvas of events in these directions. Everything began back in spring. The Russian command, before being intensified in the then Toretsk and Pokrovsk directions, carried out a process of rapid deployment of its strike and operational tactical groupings. Within a period of time, the forces and resources between them were reassigned. Specifically, the liberated Kurakovsk toward Toretsk was regrouped almost entirely by the 8th Army. Its units were deployed along 2 main directions, Vosvizhenka Novopoltevka and Pantelemonivka Sh Sherbanivka. Additionally, some of its units were directly involved in the 51st Army sector at the time actively drinking from Toretsk. The units gradually retreated under Donetsk and its previous brigades, previously operating in the center group, Pokrovsko, therefore its operational formation had stabilized. Then, three events unfolded: the general assault of Donetsk, the elimination of Ukrainian forces southwest of it, and the breakthrough of Ukrainian defenses north of Vostochny, meaning the 8th and 51st Armies moved into an active and more-scale offensive. It became clear very quickly that even the most successful of these events, the breakthrough of north of Vostochny, let's say, did not quite meet the planned pace. The 8th Army, acting in independent areas and directions, turned out inability to meet the required pace of capturing and reaching the corresponding planned line. It came out not very quickly to the Russian team that the 8th Combined Arms Army could not operate independently and simultaneously in two directions, separating into two sides, Konstantinovka from the side of Donetsk and Vostochny, simultaneously winding the flank toward Pokrovsk. It was decided quite quickly for the 8th Army, leaving one task to break through to Konstantinovka from the south, bypassing Glebenbik Reservoir from its western and eastern tips, reducing its line of offense. In addition, the 51st Army itself, at about the same time, was pulled from the Donetsk direction, breaking into the north of Vostochny, aimed at for a further offensive in the area of North Pokrovsk and the subsequent blocking of the city, which was perceived, it should be, by the plan of the entire Pokrovsko-Myrnograd. Offensive operation. The entire 51st Army on the Pokrovsko line has effectively defended itself against the Russian command. The 51st Army brigades have quickly captured Malinovka, advanced toward Novokonomichesk and Mirolyubivka, and most importantly, they have quickly advanced northward east of Dobrapilya toward Rodinskoye. However, its command at that moment had somewhat overestimated its own forces and capabilities. It decided it could simultaneously break through the area of North Pokrovsko and head toward Dobrapilya from the east at the same time. Ukrainian command, moving toward Poltevka and between Popovyar and Yablonivka, couldn't move north at the same pace to secure cover for the 51st Army from the flank, at least from the east along the Dobrapilya direction. The result did not make itself wait. The Ukrainian command, compared to previous cases, responded fairly quickly to these breakthroughs of the 51st Army toward the Dobrapilya-Kramatorsk road, reaching out the fighting tactical groups on its flanks. The planned crushing of the 51st Army and its battleship itself began, but also moved the unit that used to work in the southern part of its army line to its breakthrough. Still, despite this fully resolving the task of holding the breakthrough in the Dobrapilya direction, the command of the 51st Army could never do it itself. At the moment, Mashevitz writes, some forces of the 51st Army on its right flank are clearly in a rather difficult situation, under the threat of full encirclement. Moreover, its command obviously does not consider the position of the threat and tries to carry out attacking assault actions, and both in Pokrovsk and in the Dobrapilya direction as part of its main task, to enter the Shevchenko-Beletsk, Rodinsk, and Grishina area in northern Pokrovsk and block it. The reasons for such self-confidence are lower than the command of the 51st Army of Russian Armed Forces. Apparently, during the last week, Ukrainian forces managed to make a very tangible and complicated life for the former 1st Army Corps of the DNR, now it is the 51st Army. Specifically, Ukrainian forward units clearly managed to advance in the direction of Vladimirovka-Novodoretskia. They are likely now trying to secure Pankovka and conduct fighting behind Mayak, and possibly Pankovka Novotoretskoye. There was also likely no advance of Ukrainian forces in the direction of Myrnograd-Razin. There is information that Ukrainian forces are already fighting behind Razin. The distance between Razin and Pankovka does not exceed 3 kilometers. In addition, there was obviously no attack of Ukrainian forces in the direction of Nikanorovka-Pankovka. Their results, for now, are fairly fragmented and contradicting. There is information that Ukrainian forces allegedly managed to reach Pankovka. This is next to the Pankovka village and Fedorovka. However, he found confirmation from her, writes Mashevitz. However, the most interesting thing is that the 51st Army, simultaneously with these events ongoing in its sector, continues trying to break through to Rodinsk and the Krasny Liman south of it, along the former Suvorovka and the Fedorovka themselves. Obviously, they are doing this within the main plan of the 51st Army. They are not embarrassed at all that Ukrainian forces could break through to Razina and Novotoretsk on their flanks and simply encircle them. Moreover, there is information that even on the very peak of the rest of the Dobrapilya breakthrough, some assault groups from Astava managed to hold onto Kucherov Yar again. With regard to all this, it should be noted that for such a kind of, to put it mildly, non-ordinary actions of the command of the 51st Army of Russian Armed Forces, there are quite explainable reasons. The fact is that Russia focused on the left flank of the neighboring 8th Army, that is, practically in the operational rear of the 51st Army part and the connection of its improvised Marine Corps. In particular, the 155th Separate Brigade of Marine Corps is recorded, as well as a number of other units. In the fact itself, there is nothing unusual about the deployment of units and the deployment of marine forces in Russia in this direction. It is much more interesting, which is exactly what they are focused on in the area of Novopoltavsk and Malinovka. It is quite logical to assume that for the drop-off attack on Konstantinovka, the left flank of the 8th Army, which has exactly this main goal, this is being discussed. Moreover, it is reported that some units of Russian Marines are already recorded in attacks and assaults against the direction of Poltavka-Rusynyar and Novolenovka-Stepanovka. However, I fully agree, writes Moshavets, that part of these forces and resources will be used in Russia not for the offensive of Konstantinovka, that is, in the area of the 8th Army, but for the stabilization of the situation in the area of the 51st Army. I think the command of the 51st Army itself hopes for this, and this is where its self-confidence comes from. The fact is based on the fact that, apparently, most of these forces and resources have not yet been introduced in Konstantinovka, says Konstantin Moshavets. That is, apparently we see that in the Donetsk direction of Russia, first of all, concentrated troops, secondly, trying to hold the border of its Dobrapilya breakthrough, while the Ukrainian forces continue to pressure the Russian forces from both sides. Whether it will work out or not, I can't say. As you can see, 99% of deliveries in this war ultimately do not happen on both sides, and yet the situation may not be called stable, but so far we do not see any critical deterioration in the Donetsk region along the line of fighting operations. More attention is now being paid to Kupiansk, to Liman, where Russian forces are quite actively operating, and we will discuss them with you in more detailed reports in the future. As for the Russian soldiers, they are still being dispatched in one place. A woman told the story of her former husband, a participant of the SVO, who was sent on a mission as part of a group of 6 soldiers. 5 soldiers were killed, her husband survived but was unreachable for a few days. At that time, the entire unit, including him, was officially included in the list of missing people. 4 days later, he called. He went on a mission, there were 6 of them, 5 of them died, and my husband survived but was unreachable for a few days. The command couldn't tell the soldiers he was alive, so all 6 of them were declared missing. After his return, the man was provided with a vacation, and the wives reconciled, but as indicated, he was not paid back. While working there, he was told that his documents were forgotten to be handed over, as they were cleared for the missing person. For over 3 months now, he has not received his pay back. According to the woman, during a check of the documents, it was revealed that a total of over 2 million rubles were charged at his expense, but the money was paid by unknown individuals. She claims that the fighter is an orphan, has never been married or has any children. According to her, that's why the command decided that no one would care about his fate and stole his money.
В бухгалтерии все эти документы имеются. Я так понимаю, что они посмотрели так.
Otherwise, no one will look for him if he doesn't need it. I mean, I don't know if this is some kind of money cleaning up or something like that. As they say in The Serviceman, everything was mixed up. The fool got it for the ass, and the ass got it for the face. She accused the responsible people of possible kidnapping and money cleaning up. She also noted that the serviceman has a brother who has been missing since January 2025 and assumed that a similar situation could happen with his payments. The wife of the serviceman added that 7 of the 5 dead fighters are still forbidden to talk about the actual death of their relatives, and probably the same will happen with their payments. I just wonder how much more to shoot there, like this. And these 5 people who died who were with him are not allowed to tell that they are already dead. That is, their families still do not know that these people are no longer alive. In general, the Russian army is a place not only where you will be beaten, bited, lost food, forced to fight each other, and this is all your own commander, but even in the case of your death or injury, the money of your family cannot be taken. Komskoy, no one takes you for people, so avoid the Russian army in all possible ways, and if you are in there, then run from there. With the help of organization, go to the forest, or by addressing the Ukrainian side, giving yourself to captivity, through the I Want to Live program. In general, there are options. Well, if not, then most likely some kind of drone, one of the tech which we are including today, will kill you. Don't forget about the analysis in the description. Michael Nacke was with you, and until next time, all the best, bye.